Hello and welcome. This is Guy Glidden, and this is the third of a set of 4 screencast videos that are designed to help you with Excel skills development. Let me recap briefly. Lesson 1 had to do with the basics. We talked about moving and organizing data, some of the uses of the Excel and the structure of Excel in terms of rows and columns and cells and sheets. And we got as far as talking briefly about the function wizard. In lesson 2, I showed some demonstrations of the use of function wizard and introduced the concept of visit table. And if you go back to that lesson, or if you need to, I demonstrated 4 uses of function wizard: average, median, standard deviation, and the Pearson product moment correlation. Pearson is a nice, neat name for the correlation coefficient for 2 variables. That's what you would use, or what I used, and you're going to see it in the demonstration of the comparison of proficiency levels and poverty levels for schools. So that's a good one to keep track of. And then this lesson and then we introduced pivot table as a concept, but didn't get very far about it. So this lesson we're going to spending the time showing some purposes and some uses of pivot table. This is really like a heavy hitter. And to do so, this is where we ended up last time we had a lesson here. We had set up a pivot table, and we had done so, and I had actually created a frequency distribution. Now let me do something here that is not too daring. I'm going to delete all of this and do this again, because I forgot to show you one thing here, and this is going to allow me to do it. Let's go back over here to Reading School 101. That's where we were when we set up the pivot table. And let's go back and do a pivot table setup again. And if we do so, we're going to go up so you can see the action in. We go to the Insert tab. Under Insert tab, we go to Pivot Table. And now, if everything works right, and we've got the file well organized and set up, it's going to show a suggested setting for what the pivot table will be. And let me go over here, and you can check that out visually to see if that's where you want it to be, because you'll see the little dotted line around here. Well, it says the upper left dimension of this pivot table should be A1, and you see that's the cell in the upper left hand corner. We go over here, and it's going to go as far as column M, and you'll see the little pivot, the little dotted line squiggles down here. Then we're going to scroll up here to the bottom and keep on going here, and you'll see it terminates at the bottom of the distribution that I have with row 101. So that tells us that that's pretty much what we want it to do. And if I hit the OK button, what I didn't explain to you is this creates the pivot table on a new page. That's what I've done. It has a blank set of rotation, because that's where the data is going to show up when we do these magical things with pivot table. And over on the right hand side of the page, you're going to see a field list. That's where you do the work. So that's why we got to keep switching back and forth to go on here. Now, when I did it last lesson, the first time I tried to set up a pivot table, it didn't work for me. The reason it did not work for me is I didn't clean up my junk at the bottom of the pivot table. To work in a pivot table, the distribution has to be symmetrical. In other words, all of the columns need to be labeled and all the rows need to be labeled. And if it's not done so, and that's what I had not done, it didn't work too well. Okay, first process here, values is the thing you want to modify, and these other columns have to do with simply modifying what we're going to put in the values comment. So let's start by, we want to pay attention to something having to do with narrative test scores, because I'm going to show you this frequency distribution again. I want to do a frequency distribution of narrative test scores. And to do, first of all, by drawing the thing narrative down to the column. Now, for some reason, Excel thinks I want to sum that. I don't want to sum that. I want it to come in. And so all I have to do to change the sum to something else is put my cursor on top of that and hit a left mouse. And right up here, it says Value Field Settings. And here are the options. So it will tell me that on my pivot table menu, I could do a count, I could do an average, I could find the maximum, the minimum, I could do the product, I could do a standard deviation. In other words, I got some options here. For this purpose, I want to do count. So I'm going to do a count. And a count really, when I do the first step of this, simply tells me that I have 100 test scores in the distribution. Now that's not very revealing, and of course you already knew that. So here comes the second part, and this is something that if you didn't have a pivot table, it takes you a long time to do. I want to create a frequency distribution. If I use narrative to modify a narrative, it simply pick it down to the row settings, and this is what I did last time. This is a frequency distribution. It happens to be from lowest score to highest score, but that's pretty easy for you to reverse if you need to. Nevertheless, it does satisfy the purposes. In other words, you can see a dimension of the scores. You can see what's going on here. Okay, now, so we're going to go with that. And so that now, incidentally, what would happen if I put narrative in a column? Well, here's what happens if before I do that, I better show you what I'm doing over here. It probably would help you out here. I suppose I took the narrative modifier in the row labels and put it over in the column labels and put it up here. And put it up here. It still is a frequency distribution, but because it goes horizontally rather than vertically, it's kind of a mess to read. So let's do it vertically, like most distributions of numbers would be. Okay, now here's a neat thing. If I go in here and I could copy, and I'm going to do that, I'm going to copy the cells that contain my pivot table. I'm going to do a copy. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do a paste. I have pasted the pivot table function again. And I have a frequency distribution right beside me that looks the same way. I want to do that. I did this for a reason. I want to do something different here now. So I'm going to take this, and let me show you what I'm doing here. Helps out. I'm going to take this narrative information from the low labels, and I'm going to go over here to count, go back to my left mouse, go to value settings, and I'm going to change it to an average. And I'm going to come up here, and lo and behold, it's going to show me that I have an average of 85.11. Now, watch what I do right here. I'm going to take a copy of that, and I'm going to make a copy of it, which I just did. I'm going to pull this down here, and if you remember, it was about 85 and a fraction here. I'm going to do a paste, but I'm going to use a paste special. And I'm going to, up here, the top of the section, if I tell it to paste values only, which I'm going to do right now, it pasted that in there, but there's one big difference. It pasted the numbers, but it didn't repaste the function. So now I have a visual reminder right out here that my average is 85 and a fraction. Now let's go up again and do something different with this here. Let's go over to, okay, now let's go up again here. And we're going to go back up to this little pivot table we just created up here before. And now I want to change this from average to standard deviation. And again, I've got that. Now, you saw that number if you were paying attention to the last lesson. But notice how much easier this is. I'm going to make a copy of this, copy of it here. And 85 minus 11 is what? That's about 74. I'm going to paste that, paste that over here. So I can put it over here. And then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to copy that again. And now I'm going to 85 plus 11 is going to be somewhere around 96 or so. So I'm going to do a paste special here in the values. Now look what I've done. I've created a visual picture that you can see, and you could actually do that. So now that I've pretty well shown here that my average is 85 and a fraction, and that my standard deviation if I subtract 11 and a fraction from 85, that's going to put it right about at 74. Don't have a 74, but you can see where I am there. And if I do the same thing up here at the top end, I can pretty well encapsulate my range of scores. Now, let's do something. I want to move on quickly and do some other demonstrations, because this is just to show you some things you can do with pivot table that are kind of neat. I'm going to delete this second pivot table that I made because I don't want to use that anymore, because now I want to show you something that you can do that's really quite valuable. I'm going to take this count of narrative now, and I'm going to change this again to an average. And here, I put the average over here as 85.21. Now here's what's really neat. Somebody says, that's fine, I want to see the averages for the kids by race grouping. So I'm going to draw that down to row labels. And just that quickly, I've created averages for not only the total, but every subgroup here. Now I'm going to go back over, and somebody says, that's nice, but can you do the same thing for the gender grouping? Going to draw that down here. Look what I've done. In the amount of time, and if I hadn't been talking, I could have done it a lot faster. I have taken one average and I've multiplied that, so I have a whole ton of averages now. And so now I can do that in that's a really a neat tool. So by providing information, so let's take that. Here's a neat thing I can do. I'm going to take that. I'm going to make a copy of that, and I'm going to paste it down here below using paste special, because I'm going to keep that information. Now I want to reverse this. Now I want to, rather than average, I want to go back up here, and I'm going to go to count. And here's what I've done. I'm going to put these kind of side by side, and you can see them now here. What a valuable tool that is. If I scroll down, you can see what I've accomplished. I now have created a little visual comparison, so I can show the average score for each of these groups, and now I also know the number of subjects created that average. So I have a group for American Indian. I have averages, but it's not very meaningful because there are only 2 people in the comparison group. However, I got some groups that are bigger in number, and it's a little more meaningful in terms of the averages. So basically, this is the heavy hitting part of pivot table. It means that you can take this information and you can do a lot. And I'm going to show you one more comparison. About to run out of time, and I'll have time to maybe show this. Remember that I had a group in here that was going to subdivide here. Now I can't show both of those groups at one time, but if I put it on disabled, and I show, well, I only have one disabled student in this student, so that would show that's not a problem here. Whereas I have 99 that are in the general ed grouping. So going back over here and summarizing very quickly before I run out of time, this allows me to do a lot of subgroups for information for subgroups. It's really the most meaningful comparison you need to do in a day and age where you need to look at disaggregation of test information in a really important way. Thank you very much.